He thought the house was community property. He said it like it was a spell. Like the moment the judge heard those words, my name would slide off the deed and onto the floor like dust. He said it in the hallway outside Department 12, leaning close enough that I could smell his mint gum and the coffee he'd been drinking all morning, like confidence was something you could brew. "Half of it is mine, Maya," Derek Cole whispered, smiling with that calm, practiced face he used with strangers. "That's how California works. Community property. You're not walking out of here with a whole house." And for a second, I felt that familiar tug in my chest. The old fear, the old confusion, the old version of me who used to apologize even when I hadn't done anything wrong. Then I looked at his hand, the hand holding a folder. My folder. My documents. The folder he'd taken from the kitchen counter when he walked out 2 months earlier. The night he packed a suitcase and still had the nerve to ask me to be civil. I swallowed. I didn't say what I wanted to say, because the truth was, Derek wasn't wrong about one thing. If you don't understand the paperwork will understand you. And he was counting on me being too tired, too scared, too polite to fight back. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I had already found the one sentence he missed, the one line tucked in a place men like Derek never read. The house wasn't community property. Not the way he thought, not the way he needed it to be. And by the time he realized that it was already too late, it started on an ordinary Tuesday in late March, the kind of bright California morning that makes everything look like it can't possibly go wrong. Sunlight on the kitchen tile, the hum of the fridge, my coffee steaming in a mug that still had his initials on the bottom because I hadn't thrown it out yet. Because habits don't die the same day your marriage does. I was at the island counter, looking at a stack of mail, bills, grocery flyers, a letter from the county that made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Notice of default in bold. My throat went dry because I paid the mortgage. I had paid it since before I met Derek, before I even knew his name. I bought that house 5 years before our wedding, a small Spanish-style place in a quiet neighborhood outside Anaheim, with a lemon tree that leaned over the fence like it was listening. I bought it when I was 26, with a down payment I saved from overtime and a second job teaching spin classes. I refinanced once, years later, to get a better rate, but I always paid. And now the county was telling me I was in default. My hands shook as I ripped the envelope open. Inside was a notice about a second lien, a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, one I didn't recognize, one with Derek's signature on the paperwork, and mine. Sitting right next to it, my signature. The problem was, I hadn't signed anything. I stared at the page until the words blurred. My coffee sat untouched, cooling into something bitter. I called the number on the notice. A woman with a polite voice answered and confirmed what the paper said. Yes, there was a line of credit. Yes, it had been opened 7 months ago. Yes, it was secured by the property. I asked the question that made my voice crack. Who authorized it? There was a pause, a click of keys. "Both borrowers," she said gently. "You and Mr. Cole." I laughed once, a sharp, ugly sound. "That's impossible," I said. "I never signed." Another pause, longer this time. "Ma'am?" The documents were notarized. Notarized. That word, that stupid word, like a stamp was the same as truth. I hung up and sat down on the kitchen floor because suddenly my legs didn't work, my back pressed against the cabinet door. The tile felt cold through my jeans, and the first thing my mind did, the first thing it always did, was try to make it make sense. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I signed something without reading. Maybe Derek told me it was for taxes or insurance. Maybe. Then the second thing my mind did, the healthier thing, was remember who Derek was. Derek was the kind of man who could smile while he took something from you. The kind of man who called himself a provider while he spent your money. The kind of man who looked you in the eyes and said, "Trust me," like trust was a tool he could pick up and put down. I called him. He didn't answer. I texted. No response. I called again, straight to voicemail. And that's when I heard his voice in my head. Not from the phone, but from the last fight we had, the night he left. "You act like it's your house," he'd said, standing by the doorway with his keys in his hand, like I'm a guest, like I didn't live here too. "You moved in," I'd replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't hand you a deed." He smiled like I was being cute. "We're married," he said. "That makes it community." I remembered how certain he sounded, like marriage was a receipt, like vows were a bill of sale. At the time, I didn't argue because I didn't want to turn a fight into a war. I didn't know he was already drafting the war in his head and filing it. That same day, I drove to the bank where the HELOC had been opened. I sat across from a manager with a neat haircut and a trained expression. He pulled up the account and slid copies of the documents toward me. There it was again. My name, my address, my social, my signature, and next to it, a notary stamp. The notary's name printed in small letters at the bottom. I stared at it so hard I thought I could burn it off the page. "You're saying this is valid," I said. He spread his hands. "It's recorded properly. It's secured by the property. If it's fraudulent, you'll need to file a dispute and speak with an attorney." I felt heat creep up my neck. "Fraudulent," I repeated. "You mean someone stole my identity and put a lien on my house?" He didn't correct me. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me like I was another problem he was trained to contain. I left the bank with a folder under my arm and a sensation in my chest that felt like the beginning of an earthquake. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and did what I should have done months earlier. I opened my laptop and logged into the county recorder's portal. I typed my address. And when the results popped up, I felt my stomach turn. There was the deed, my deed, the original deed from when I purchased the house. Maya Hart, an unmarried woman. That part made me want to cry, because it reminded me there was a version of me who did hard things alone and didn't need permission. Then I scrolled. There were other documents. A recorded deed of trust for the HELOC, a notice of interest, a spousal consent. And there it was, a quitclaim deed, dated 6 months ago, transferring an interest from me to Maya Hart, a married woman, and Derek Cole, a married man, as community property with right of survivorship. I blinked. I leaned closer. I read it again. That document wasn't just a lien. It was a trap. Because even if Derek couldn't take the house through the HELOC, he could argue that the quitclaim changed the character of the property. He could argue I transmuted it from separate to community. He could argue I gave him ownership. All he needed was that paper. And my signature was on it. Except it wasn't. I felt nauseous. In my head, the timeline snapped into place like a cruel puzzle. 6 months ago, Derek had told me we needed to update paperwork because he was looking at refinancing options. He'd handed me a stack of documents at the kitchen counter and pointed to lines with yellow sticky notes. He'd smiled. He'd kissed my forehead. he'd said. It's boring stuff, babe. Just sign where it says sign. And I hadn't signed. Not because I was smart. Because I was busy. Because that week my mother had been in the hospital for a heart issue, and I'd been driving back and forth after work, exhausted and scared, living on caffeine and denial. I remembered telling him, not tonight. I remembered him saying, okay, tomorrow. I remembered never doing it. And yet, here it was, recorded, stamped, filed, like reality could be forged with ink. I drove home on autopilot, the freeway bright and loud around me, my mind replaying every moment Derek had touched a piece of paper near me, every time he'd asked for my ID for insurance, every time he'd grabbed the mail before I saw it, every time he'd said, I'll handle it, and I'd let him. When I walked into the house, the air felt wrong, like it knew. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and went straight to the drawer where I kept our marriage documents, the marriage license, the tax returns, and the prenup. The prenup we signed because my father, who had been burned in his own divorce, had insisted. Derek hated it. He'd laughed at it. He'd called it unromantic. But he signed because he wanted the wedding more than he wanted to argue. I pulled it out, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it with shaking hands. The pages were thick, official. I found the section my dad's attorney had explained to me years ago. Separate property. It listed the house by address. It stated clearly, the property located at my address was my separate property acquired before marriage. It stated, any increase in value remains separate unless otherwise agreed in writing with specific formalities. And then, the sentence Derek never read. If any document purporting to change title or character of the separate property is executed without Maya's informed, written consent and independent counsel, such document shall be presumed invalid and subject to rescission, and any party relying on it shall bear all resulting legal fees. I stared at that sentence until tears finally spilled down my face. Not because it was poetic, because it was protection. It was a rope my past self had tied to keep my future self from drifting into exactly this. But I also knew something else. A prenup isn't magic. It's a tool, and tools only work if you use them. So I did the next thing that felt impossible. I called a lawyer. Her name was Renee Alvarez. She had a small office above a coffee shop in Santa Ana, and a handshake that felt firm and warm at the same time. She listened while I dumped the whole story out of my mouth like I was emptying poison. She didn't look shocked. She looked irritated, not at me, at him. When I finished, she leaned back and said, okay, here's the first thing you need to understand. Derek is going to keep saying community property because he wants you to panic and settle. But community property doesn't automatically mean he gets half of everything you owned before marriage. I let out a shaky breath. He says it does, I whispered. Renee's eyes narrowed. Of course he says it does. That's his whole strategy. She pulled out a legal pad and wrote 2 words, title, tracing. Your house was purchased before marriage, she said. That's separate property. Now, there are situations where a spouse can claim an interest if community funds paid down principal or improved the property. That's called reimbursement. It's complicated, but it's not half. And your prenup strengthens your position. I swallowed. But he recorded a quitclaim deed. Renee's pen stopped. Recorded, she repeated softly. Then she looked at me. Did you sign it? No. Did you appear before that notary? No. Renee nodded once, like her brain clicked into a new lane. Then we're dealing with fraud, possibly forgery, in notarization misconduct. My hands gripped the edge of the chair. So what do we do? Renee's voice was calm. We do this fast, because if he's recorded that deed, he might try to refinance, sell, or encumber the property further. We file at Ellis Pendens. We file for injunctive relief, and we notify the lender that the lien is disputed due to fraud. My heart hammered. Lis Pendens. It's a notice of pending litigation, she explained. It basically tells the world, don't touch this property, it's in dispute. It makes it hard for him to sell or refinance without the issue coming up. I nodded, even though my brain was buzzing. And then, Renee continued, we pull the notary journal. If the notary did their job, there will be an entry showing who appeared, what ID was used, what was signed. If there's no journal entry, or if the ID doesn't match, that's your evidence. I exhaled. What if the notary's journal says I was there? Renee's mouth tightened. Then we challenge it. We compare signatures. We get an expert. We subpoena footage if possible. People think notarization makes something bulletproof. It doesn't. It just adds another layer of accountability. And if that layer's crooked, it becomes a liability. I left her office with a plan and a fee agreement I signed, with hands that still shook. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Finally. Stop making this ugly. Just accept it's community property. We can split like adults. My chest tightened. Split like adults. As if he hadn't forged my name. As if he hadn't put a lien on my house behind my back. As if he hadn't taken my life and tried to file it under his ownership. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove home and sat in my driveway for a long time, staring at the front door. The door I had painted myself, the porch light I installed, the garden beds I built, my house. Then I went inside and did something that felt like a line in sand. I changed the locks, not because I thought he'd break in, because I needed my body to understand that I was no longer sharing space with someone who was actively trying to erase me. The next morning, Renee filed the paperwork. The Lis Pendens was recorded by noon, and by 3 p.m., my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered, heart pounding. Ms. Hart, a man said, voice clipped. This is from the title company. We received notice of pending litigation on the property. There's an attempted refinance application in process. My throat went cold. Attempted refinance? Yes, he said. Submitted yesterday. We're stopping it due to the notice. Yesterday. Derek had texted me to split like adults while he was literally trying to refinance my house out from under me. I thanked the man, hung up, and felt something crack inside me. Not break, crack. Like the final piece of my denial giving way. Derek wasn't going to stop until someone forced him to stop. So I stopped being polite. Renee sent a formal demand letter to the lender, the title company, and Derek's attorney, asserting fraud and disputing the validity of the quitclaim deed and the HELOC. Derek hired a lawyer named Preston Mills, the kind of lawyer who wore 2 white shirts and smiled like he was hosting a game show. Within a week, Preston filed a response arguing that the house was community property because Derek had contributed to the mortgage, contributed to maintenance, and because the recorded quitclaim deed changed the title. He attached the quitclaim deed as if it was proof of love. He also filed a motion for exclusive use and possession. He wanted the judge to order that Derek could move back in to the house he had tried to steal. When Renee read the motion, she didn't even blink. She just looked up and said, "He's escalating because he thinks you'll fold." I felt sick. Will the judge make me let him back in? I asked. Renee's voice was steady. Not if we do this right. The first hearing was set for 2 weeks later. And in those 2 weeks, Derek turned into a storm. He showed up at the house twice, standing on the sidewalk like he still belonged there. I watched him through the curtains. He didn't knock. He just stared at the windows like he was trying to intimidate me through glass. He called my sister, telling her I was hiding assets. He posted vague things on social media about betrayal and greedy women. He texted me at midnight one night, "You're going to lose that house. Everyone knows it's community." I slept with my phone face down, and every time fear tried to creep back in, I opened the prenup and read that sentence again. Any party relying on it shall bear all resulting legal fees. I started to understand Derek's real weakness. He didn't just want the house. He wanted me to believe he deserved it. Because if I believed it, I would hand it over without making him work. I wasn't going to do that anymore. The day of the hearing, the courthouse smelled like old paper and nervous sweat. The hallway was filled with people holding files, families whispering, attorneys moving like sharks between benches. Derek stood at the far end, wearing the same navy suit he wore at our wedding rehearsal dinner. I hated that my brain noticed. He saw me and smiled, that same confident curve of his mouth. Renee touched my elbow gently. "Don't look at him like he's your husband," she murmured. "Look at him like he's a witness." We walked into the courtroom. The judge was a woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Her expression was neutral in the way that told me she'd seen every version of human mess and didn't have time for performances. Preston stood and argued first. He said community property like it was a drumbeat. He said Derek had lived in the home for years, contributed financially, and that the quitclaim deed clearly showed intent to transmute the property. He held the recorded deed up like it was a holy text. Then Renee stood. She didn't start with emotion. She started with law. "Your Honor," she said, "the property was acquired prior to marriage. It is presumptively separate property. We have a prenuptial agreement listing the property as separate. The opposing party relies on a quitclaim deed purportedly signed by my client. My client denies signing it, denies appearing before any notary, and we have filed a fraud claim and request injunctive relief. Additionally, there is a fraudulent HELOC secured against the property, also bearing a forged signature." The judge's gaze sharpened. "Forgery," she repeated. "Yes," Renee said. "We are in the process of subpoenaing the notary journal and retaining a handwriting expert. In the meantime, my client should not be forced to allow a party who is actively engaging in fraud to re-enter her separate property." Preston's smile flickered. "Your Honor, these are allegations. The deed is recorded." The judge looked at him like he'd tried to sell her a fake watch. "Recorded doesn't mean true," she said. A hush fell over the room. My heart thudded. The judge turned to Derek. "Mr. Cole," she said, "did you sign these documents in person with Mrs. Hart present?" Derek's voice was smooth. "Yes, Your Honor." The lie came out like a rehearsed line. "And the notary was present?" the judge asked. "Yes." The judge stared for a long second. Then she said, "I am not granting exclusive possession to the moving party based on disputed documents with allegations of forgery. Ms. Hart remains in the home. Additionally, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order preventing either party from refinancing, encumbering, transferring, or selling the property until further order." My breath left my lungs like a balloon losing air. Derek's jaw tightened. Preston opened his mouth, but the judge held up a hand. "And?" she added, looking directly at Derek. If these allegations have merit, you are exposing yourself to serious consequences. Derek's smile was gone now. In the hallway after the hearing, he walked toward me with quick steps. You think you won something, he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. Renee stepped in front of me like a shield. All communication goes through counsel. Derek's eyes flashed. She's lying. Renee's voice was ice. Then you have nothing to worry about. Derek walked away, and for the first time since this started, I watched him go without feeling like my world was collapsing. Because now the fight had a shape, and Derek couldn't reshape it with a word. Escalation came fast after that. The lender froze the HELOC account, but the default notice didn't vanish overnight. The lien was still recorded. The threat was still there, like a shadow tied to the house. Renee had me file a police report for identity theft and forgery. Sitting in a station under fluorescent lights, explaining to a board officer that my husband had forged my signature was one of the most humiliating things I've ever done. Not because I was ashamed of myself, because I realized how many systems assume you're exaggerating when the person hurting you has a wedding ring. The officer took the report and gave me a case number. It's a civil matter, too, he said, shrugging. Forgery is a crime, I replied. He looked at me like he hadn't expected me to know that. Yeah, he said slowly. We'll forward it. When I left, I sat in my car and cried hard enough to fog the windshield. Then I wiped my face, went home, and scanned every document I had. Renee subpoenaed the notary. Her name was Elaine Mercer. She operated out of a shipping store that also did passport photos and mailbox rentals, the kind of place where people notarize papers between errands. When the subpoena hit Elaine's inbox, she called Renee's office in a panic. Renee put her on speaker. Elaine's voice trembled. I don't understand. I notarized what was brought to me. The man had ID. The woman wasn't there. Renee's eyes narrowed. So you notarized a signature for someone who was not present? Elaine made a small sound. He said she couldn't leave work. He said he had her ID. He said he had a power of attorney. My stomach flipped. Power of attorney. Derek had tried to use those words on me once, years ago, asking me to sign one just in case. I refused. Elaine kept talking, like she was trying to dig herself out of a hole with her bare hands. I shouldn't have, she whispered. I know I shouldn't have. He was persuasive. He said it was his wife. Renee's voice was controlled fury. Bring your journal. Bring the copy of the ID. Bring everything. Elaine sobbed softly. Okay. When Renee hung up, she looked at me. You understand what this means? She asked. I nodded slowly, throat tight. He didn't just forge, I whispered. He convinced someone to help. Renee's expression was grim. Or he found someone willing. Within days, we had copies of the notary journal. And there it was. An entry for the quitclaim deed. The signer listed as Maya Hart. The ID type, California driver's license. The ID number didn't match mine. It was off by 2 digits. Elaine had photocopied the ID presented. The photo looked like me, if you squinted. Same hair color, same general face shape. But the eyes were wrong. The mouth was wrong. It was a cheap fake. My hands shook as I held the copy. Derek hadn't just forged my signature. He had a fake ID made. Renee exhaled sharply. This is getting criminal, she said. My stomach churned. Part of me wanted to be horrified. Part of me was. But part of me, a colder part, felt something else. Relief. Because Derek had made a mistake. A real one. a traceable one, a mistake that wasn't just emotional manipulation, a mistake that could be proven. Renee hired a handwriting expert, a man with thin glasses who asked me to sign my name 10 different ways on clean paper. I did it, feeling like I was performing my own identity. He compared those samples to the signatures on the quitclaim deed and the HELOC documents. His report arrived 2 weeks later. The conclusion was blunt. The signatures were not consistent with my known handwriting. They showed signs of simulation and tracing. Simulation, tracing. Like my name was a picture Derek copied. Renee filed that report with the court. Preston responded by accusing me of conspiring to hide assets. Derek's story shifted every time the facts tightened. First he claimed I signed willingly. Then he claimed I authorized him to sign. Then he claimed I forgot. Then he claimed I was crazy. He even filed a declaration saying I was emotionally unstable and prone to paranoia, and that I was weaponizing the legal system. Renee laughed when she read it, but there was no humor in her eyes. "That's his pattern," she said. "When he can't win on paper, he tries to win by making you look unreliable." I stared at the declaration and felt a slow rage build. Not explosive, focused. Because it dawned on me. Derek wasn't just trying to take my house. He was trying to rewrite me, turn me into a woman nobody would believe. So I started documenting everything, every text, every missed call, every time he showed up near the house, every time a neighbor told me he'd been asking questions, every time he used the phrase community property, like it was a hammer. One night in early May, I came home from work and found a moving truck parked across the street. My stomach dropped. 2 men stood near it, leaning against the side like they were waiting for instructions. And Derek was there, standing on my lawn like he owned it. He waved when he saw me, my hands clenched around my steering wheel. I didn't get out of the car right away. I locked the doors. I took a breath. I opened my phone and started recording. Then I stepped out. Derek walked toward me, smiling wide enough to look friendly to a stranger. "Hey," he said, voice loud. "We're just here to pick up my stuff." "You don't live here?" I replied, keeping my voice level. "You can't be here." He held up a paper. "Court order," he lied, waving it like a flag. I didn't move closer. I didn't grab it. I kept recording. "Read it to me," I said. "What does it say?" Derek's smile tightened. He glanced down, then up. "It says I have rights," he said. I felt my blood pound. "No, it doesn't." One of the moving guys shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Derek stepped closer. "Maya, don't do this in front of them. Just let me get my things." "You can schedule a police standby," I said, "through attorneys." Derek's eyes flicked to my phone. "Are you recording me?" "Yes," I said, "because you keep lying." His expression darkened, the mask slipping for a moment. "You think you're so smart," he hissed, voice dropping. "But you're going to lose anyway. The house is community. The judge can't ignore that." "Recorded doesn't mean true," I said softly. His face twitched. Then his voice rose again, performative. "Fine. Call the cops. Make a scene. That's what you do." I didn't call the cops. I called Renee. She listened as I whispered into the phone, watching Derek pace on my lawn like a caged animal. Renee's voice was sharp. "Tell him to leave. If he doesn't, call law enforcement. He has no order, and send me the video." I lifted my chin. "Derek," I said loudly, so the movers could hear too. "You need to leave. You're trespassing." The word trespassing landed differently than please. Derek's eyes narrowed. "This is my house." "No," I said. "It's not." He stared at me, and for a second I saw the version of him that wasn't charming, the version that hated being told no. He spat onto the grass near my walkway like a child. Then he turned to the movers. "Never mind," he snapped. "Cancel it." He marched to his car, slammed the door, and peeled away so fast gravel sprayed. The movers looked at me awkwardly, then at each other, then climbed into the truck and drove off. I stood in my driveway shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the realization that Derek would keep pushing boundaries until someone made it painful. So we made it painful. Renee filed for sanctions, attorney's fees, contempt for attempting to violate the court's restraining order on encumbering the property, since the refinance application had been submitted after he'd been notified. The judge scheduled a longer evidentiary hearing. Discovery began. And that's when things got even uglier. We subpoenaed Derek's bank accounts. We subpoenaed his emails related to the refinance. We pulled his credit report. And Renee hired a forensic accountant named Howard Lynn, a quiet man with careful eyes who spoke like each word cost money. Howard sat in Renee's office and spread out spreadsheets like he was laying out a crime scene. "Your husband took draws on the HELOC," he said, tapping the numbers. "Multiple draws." "How much?" I asked, throat tight. Howard didn't look up. $82,400. My vision blurred. $82,000. From my house, from my equity, from the life I built. "Where did it go?" I whispered. Howard slid another page forward. "Cashier's checks," he said. "Wire transfers. A large payment to a private lender. A deposit to an account under a business name." "What business?" Renee asked, leaning in. Howard pointed. "Cole Capital Ventures, LLC." I let out a bitter laugh. Derek had been telling everyone he was building an investment firm. He'd been posting motivational quotes about generational wealth. He'd been wearing expensive watches he claimed were business gifts. He hadn't built anything. He'd siphoned it from my house. Howard continued. "There are also payments to a storage facility, and, interestingly, a payment to a company that creates ID cards." My stomach dropped. The fake ID. It was all connected. Renee's eyes turned sharp. "Do you have the vendor name?" Howard nodded. "Yes." The evidence started stacking like bricks. Derek's counsel tried to stall. They tried to object. They tried to claim privacy. But the judge was done with games. The judge ordered Derek to produce his phone records. And in those records, we found messages between Derek and Elaine, the notary. Messages where he coached her. Messages where he said, "It's fine, she's my wife." Messages where she hesitated and he pushed. Messages where he said, "You'll be paid extra." And then there were messages between Derek and a man named Kyle Benton, a name I didn't recognize. Howard dug further. Kyle Benton owned the small print shop Derek paid for ID services. The print shop wasn't just printing flyers. It was making fake identification. I sat in Renee's office, staring at that name. I felt cold, because suddenly this wasn't just a divorce. This wasn't just a property dispute. This was organized fraud. And the person who shared my bed for 7 years had been capable of it. Renee watched my face carefully. "Maya," she said, "I need you to understand where this is heading. There may be criminal referrals. If the DA gets involved, Derek could be charged." My hands curled into fists. "Good," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar, but it sounded strong. Derek, meanwhile, kept doubling down on community property. He told anyone who'd listen that I was trying to steal from him. He told my in-laws I was hiding money. He told Preston to file motions demanding I pay him rent for living in their house. Rent. For my own house. Every motion was another attempt to drain me emotionally and financially. But Renee had warned me. That's what people like Derek do. They don't always win by being right. They win by exhausting you until you can't keep fighting. So I built a system. I meal prepped. I slept. I stopped checking his social media. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I became boring, and boring was my armor. By mid-June, the court set the evidentiary hearing. This wasn't a short motion in a crowded calendar. This was a real hearing with witnesses, with testimony, with consequences. The night before, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. The creak of wood, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog, the soft whir of my ceiling fan. I remembered Derek's voice in the hallway outside Department 12. Half of it is mine. I closed my eyes and pictured the deed. Maya Hart, an unmarried woman. And then I pictured Derek's forged version, trying to rewrite that. I whispered into the dark, not anymore. The hearing began at 9 a.m. Derek sat at the opposite table, jaw tight, eyes hard. Preston whispered to him, gesturing at papers. Derek didn't look at me. He looked at the judge like she was a problem to solve. Renee called Elaine, the notary, as the first witness. Elaine looked small on the stand, hands twisting in her lap. Renee walked her through the journal, the ID copy, the messages. Elaine admitted she had notarized without my presence. She admitted Derek brought a woman once, a woman who looked similar. I felt my stomach roll. A woman? Renee repeated, voice steady. Elaine nodded, eyes wet. Yes, she signed. He said it was his wife. My skin went cold. Derek hadn't just made a fake ID. He had brought someone to impersonate me. The courtroom seemed to tilt. Renee's next question was gentle but sharp. Did you verify the signer's identity? Elaine swallowed. I looked at the ID. Did you compare the photo to the person signing? Elaine hesitated. Yes. And you believed it matched? Elaine's voice cracked. I thought so. Renee let that hang. Then she played the text messages. Elaine's voice in the messages. I don't feel comfortable. Derek's response. It's fine. She's my wife. Don't be dramatic. Elaine sobbed softly on the stand. Preston tried to redirect, to paint Elaine as unreliable, to make it seem like she was confused. But the journal was there. The ID number mismatch was there. The photocopy of the fake ID was there. Then Renee called the handwriting expert. He explained simulation and tracing in calm, clinical terms. He explained how forged signatures differ in pressure, speed, and line quality. He stated his opinion. The signatures were not mine. Preston tried to challenge him. The expert didn't flinch. Then Renee called Howard, the forensic accountant. Howard walked through the money, the draws, the wire transfers, the payment to the ID vendor, the payments to Derek's LLC. He explained how the HELOC funds were used. He didn't need dramatic language. Numbers were dramatic enough. When it was Preston's turn, he called Derek. Derek walked to the stand like he was stepping into a spotlight. He raised his hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat. Preston started with soft questions. Mr. Cole, did you contribute to the mortgage during the marriage? Yes, Derek said. Did you perform labor on the home? Yes. Did you and Ms. Hart intend for the home to be community property? Yes. Then Preston handed him the quitclaim deed. Is this your signature? Yes. And is that Ms. Hart's signature next to it? Yes. My stomach churned at the certainty in his voice. Renee stood for cross-examination. She approached slowly, a stack of exhibits in her hand. "Mr. Cole," she said, "you testified Miss Hart signed this deed in your presence." "Yes," Derek said. "And you testified a notary was present." "Yes." Renee held up the notary journal. "Isn't it true," she said, "that the notary's journal shows an ID number that does not match Ms. Hart's driver's license?" Derek's jaw tightened. "I don't know." Renee nodded. "You don't know. Yet you were certain she signed in front of the notary." Derek's eyes flicked to Preston. Renee continued, "Isn't it also true that the notary testified Ms. Hart was not present when she notarized the signature?" Derek's voice sharpened. "She's lying." Renee didn't react. She simply lifted another page. "Isn't it also true," she said, "that you texted the notary and offered extra payment to make it happen?" Derek's face changed. Not panic, anger. "How did you get my texts?" he snapped. Renee's voice stayed level. "Court order." The judge leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. Renee held up the message printouts. She read Derek's words into the record, one by one, letting them live in the courtroom air. Derek's hands gripped the edge of the witness box. Renee asked, "Mr. Cole, did you create or obtain a fake ID in Ms. Hart's name?" Derek laughed once, sharp. "No." Renee slid the vendor receipt forward, the payment from the HELOC funds. "Isn't it true," she asked, "that you paid Kyle Benton's print shop for ID services 2 days before the quitclaim deed was notarized?" Derek's laugh died in his throat. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at the judge. Then he looked at Preston. He said nothing. The silence was loud. Renee continued, voice calm but relentless. "Mr. Cole, did you open a HELOC secured by this property without Mrs. Hart's knowledge or consent?" Derek's eyes hardened. "It was community." Renee's mouth tightened. "That wasn't my question." Derek's voice rose. "We were married. I had rights." Renee leaned in slightly. "Did you open the HELOC without her consent?" Derek hesitated. He glanced at Preston. Preston's face was pale. The judge's voice cut through. "Answer the question, Mr. Cole." Derek swallowed. "Yes," he said finally. But she knew. Renee's eyes didn't blink. "So now you're saying she knew." Derek's face flushed. "Yes." Renee lifted the police report. "Then why did she report it as fraud?" Derek snapped. "Because she's trying to screw me." Renee nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. Then she asked the question that made Derek's confidence wobble. "Mr. Cole," she said, "are you aware that this house was listed as Ms. Hart's separate property in a premarital agreement you signed?" Derek's lips pressed tight. "Yeah." Renee held up the prenup, flipping to the exhibit tab. "And are you aware," she continued, "that the agreement states any attempt to change the character of the property without Ms. Hart's informed written consent and independent counsel is presumed invalid, and the relying party bears all legal fees?" Derek's eyes flicked, just flicked, but I saw it. The moment his brain finally found the sentence he never read, his throat bobbed. Preston shifted in his seat like a man realizing his boat had a hole. Renee didn't stop. "Mr. Cole," she said, "did Mrs. Hart have independent counsel for this quitclaim deed?" Derek's voice was smaller now. "No." "Did she sign a written acknowledgement of informed consent?" "No." "Did she ever tell you she agreed to transmute her separate property into community property?" Derek's voice sharpened again, desperate. "We lived there together. We were married." Renee's tone stayed even. "That is not an answer." Derek's face twisted. "It was implied." Renee glanced at the judge, then back. Implied doesn't record. Fraud does. The judge's expression was like stone. Renee asked one last question, and her voice softened slightly, not with kindness, but with precision. "Mr. Cole," she said, "did you bring another woman to impersonate Mrs. Hart for the purpose of signing and notarizing a deed?" Derek's face went blank. He stared. He opened his mouth. Then he shut it. Preston stood quickly. "Objection." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled." Derek's eyes flashed. He looked straight at me for the first time in weeks. In that stare was a message, a threat, a promise of future pain. And I felt something in me go still. Not fear, clarity, because in that moment, I saw him as he was. A man who believed ownership was the same as love. A man who thought marriage was a shortcut to theft. A man who would burn the whole house down if it meant he didn't have to admit he was wrong. Derek finally spoke, voice low and furious. "I didn't bring anyone." Renee nodded once. "So you're saying the notary lied?" Derek snapped. "Yes." Renee nodded again. "And you're saying the handwriting expert is wrong?" "Yes." "And the forensic accountant's records are fake?" "Yes." "And the vendor receipt is a coincidence?" "Yes." Renee stepped back, letting the absurdity sit there like smoke. Then she said quietly, "No further questions." The hearing ended after closing arguments. Renee emphasized the presumption of separate property, the prenup, the fraud evidence, and requested the court set aside the fraudulent deed, order the HELOC invalid as against me, award attorney's fees, and refer Derek's conduct to the district attorney. Preston's argument was weaker now, more defensive than confident. He tried to say Derek made mistakes, but intended fairness. He tried to say community efforts mattered. He tried to paint Derek as a husband who felt excluded. The judge didn't look moved. She took the matter under submission. That meant waiting. Waiting was its own kind of torture. For 2 weeks, I lived with my stomach in a knot. I went to work. I smiled at coworkers. I answered emails. I watered my lemon tree. But every night, I lay in bed and replayed the hearing like a movie I couldn't turn off. And Derek didn't stay quiet. He sent messages through Preston proposing settlements. Give Derek 40% equity and we drop the fraud claims. Then give Derek 30%. Then give Derek $50,000 and we'll sign off. He was bargaining like the truth was negotiable. Renee told me not to respond. "He's scared," she said. "He wants to buy your silence." One afternoon, I came home to a letter taped to my door. No envelope, just paper. Derek's handwriting. "You're going to regret this." My hands shook, but I didn't tear it down in panic. I photographed it. I emailed it to Renee. Then I took it down and threw it away like it was trash. Because that's what threats are when you stop feeding them. The court's ruling came on a Friday at 4:12 p.m. Renee called me. Her voice was calm, but I could hear satisfaction underneath. "We got it," she said. I sank onto my couch, heart hammering. "Got what?" "The judge granted our request," Renee said. She set aside the quitclaim deed as invalid. She found credible evidence of forgery and notarization misconduct. She ordered the HELOC unenforceable against you pending lender resolution. She awarded attorney's fees, and she referred the matter to the DA for potential criminal investigation. I covered my mouth with my hand. Tears spilled before I could stop them. She also, Renee added, denied Derek's claim for possession, and she noted the premarital agreement's fee-shifting provision. My chest felt tight. So, he has no ownership? Renee's voice was firm. The house remains your separate property. There may be reimbursement calculations later for any proven community contributions, but Derek does not have a 50% interest. And given his conduct, any reimbursement he might have argued for is going to be complicated. I let out a sob that sounded like relief. For a moment, I just sat there shaking, letting my body realize it could breathe. Then Renee said, "Maya, there's more." I swallowed. "What?" "The judge ordered Derek to pay your attorney's fees. All of them." I blinked. "All?" "Yes," Renee said, "because he relied on an invalid transmutation attempt and engaged in bad faith conduct. The prenup's fee clause supported it. The court cited it." My mouth fell open, because suddenly, the cost of fighting, the thing Derek expected to crush me with, was coming back on him. Power reversal doesn't always look like a dramatic speech. Sometimes it looks like a judge signing an order that turns a bully strategy into his debt. I thanked Renee, hung up, and sat in my quiet living room. The sunlight was warm on the floor. The house made its soft, settling noises. It felt the same. And yet it didn't, because now I understood something I hadn't understood before. Safety isn't just locks. It's legal clarity. It's paper that tells the world, this belongs to her. But Derek wasn't done. He never was. The next escalation came from a place I didn't expect. The lender. Even though the court found the HELOC unenforceable against me, the bank still wanted their money. They still had an account that had been drawn. They still had losses. They contacted me requesting cooperation, identity theft documentation, and they started their internal fraud investigation. I complied. I gave them everything: the police report, the handwriting analysis, the court order, and as their investigation deepened, they found something else. They found that Derek had used the HELOC proceeds to pay off a private loan that was in default, a loan with high interest, a loan tied to his LLC, and tied to that loan was a UCC filing, a lien against Derek's business assets. The private lender, once they realized the HELOC was collapsing, started chasing Derek directly. Derek was suddenly getting pressure from both sides: court, bank, private lender, and now the DA referral. He started calling, not texting, calling. I didn't answer. Then he showed up again, not with a moving truck this time, with desperation. It was a Saturday morning, bright and clean, the neighborhood quiet. I was trimming dead leaves off the rose bush by my front steps when I heard a car door close. I looked up. Derek stood at the end of my walkway. No suit, no smile, just a man in jeans and a hoodie, hair slightly unkempt, eyes red like he hadn't slept. "Maya," he said, voice rough. "We need to talk." I didn't move. I kept my shears in my hand. "Talk to your lawyer," I said. He took a step forward. "Please." The word sounded wrong on him. He looked around like he expected neighbors to be watching. Then he dropped his voice. "They're coming after me," he said. "The bank. The lender. They're saying fraud. They're saying criminal. You can stop this." I stared at him. "You can tell them it was a misunderstanding," he continued quickly. "Tell them you signed. Tell them you forgot. Just tell them something. Please." For a second, I saw the shape of a panic. Not guilt, panic, because consequences had finally found him. I felt my heart beat steady. "I'm not lying for you," I said. His face twisted. "Maya, I'm going to lose everything." I tilted my head slightly. "You already tried to make me lose everything." He stepped closer, voice turning sharp again, anger always waiting behind his fear. You're doing this because you want revenge, he snapped. I didn't flinch. No, I said softly. I'm doing this because you broke the law. His eyes flashed. We were married. I had rights. I breathed in. Then I said the sentence that made his shoulders tense. You thought the house was community property, I said. So you treated it like a bank account you could drain. Derek's mouth opened. I continued, voice calm. But the house wasn't community. Not because I didn't love you. Not because I didn't share my life. Because I bought it. I protected it. And you signed an agreement that said it was mine. Derek's jaw clenched. That prenup was bullshit. I nodded once. And yet it's binding. His hands shook slightly. I can pay you, he blurted. I'll give you money. I'll sign whatever. Just help me. I looked at him and felt something like pity trying to rise. And then I remembered the fake ID, the impersonator, the lien, the threats taped to my door. I stepped back. No, I said. His face hardened. You think you're better than me, he spat. I lifted my phone. I'm calling the police if you don't leave, I said. Derek froze. Then he laughed, bitter. You're really going to do that? Yes, I said, because you don't live here. He stared at me for a long moment, eyes burning. Then he backed away slowly, like he wanted the last image of him to be control. But when he turned and walked to his car, his shoulders were hunched. He drove off, and I stood in my yard, shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the release of something, the last thread of obligation. Because when Derek stood there begging me to lie for him, I finally understood the pure difference between love and ownership. Love doesn't require fraud. Love doesn't need a forged signature. Love doesn't tape threats to a door. A few weeks later, Renee called with an update that made me sit down. The district attorney's office opened an investigation, she said. My stomach flipped. They may contact you, she continued. They may ask for testimony, documents, more detail. I swallowed. Okay. Renee's tone softened. Are you all right? I looked around my kitchen. The same tile, the same island, the same light slanting through the window. I am, I said. And I was. Because Derek's power had always depended on me believing I couldn't survive conflict with him. But conflict didn't kill me. It clarified me. The divorce process continued, but the house fight had shifted the entire balance of power. Now Derek wasn't the one making demands. He was the one responding. His community property narrative collapsed. The judge's ruling didn't just impact the house, it colored Derek's credibility in everything else. When he claimed I was hiding money, the court saw him as a man who hid fraud. When he argued for spousal support, Renee produced evidence that he had drained tens of thousands through the HELOC and funneled it into his LLC. Support turned into scrutiny, and scrutiny turned into accountability. At mediation, Derek came in quieter. Preston was still there, still polished, but his smile was gone. They offered a settlement where Derek waived any claim to the house, accepted reimbursement calculations limited and verified, and agreed to repay part of the HELOC funds as part of property equalization. They wanted me to agree to request the DA, not pursue charges. Renee's eyes met mine. That part, she said quietly when we stepped into a private room, is not really yours to control. The DA decides, but your cooperation matters. I thought about it, not for long. I'm not bargaining with the truth, I said. Renee nodded. We countered with terms that protected me. Derek waives house claims entirely, acknowledges the deed was invalid, pays attorney's fees per court order, and agrees to a judgment for the HELOC draws, with wage garnishment if he defaults. Derek's face went tight when Preston read it. "You're trying to ruin me," he said, voice low. I met his eyes and felt nothing like fear. "No," I said. "You tried to ruin me. I'm just refusing to carry the cost." The mediator watched us like he was witnessing something he'd seen 100 times, but still found fascinating. Because sometimes the most dramatic moment in a divorce isn't screaming. It's a woman saying no and meaning it. In the end, Derek signed. Not because he suddenly became decent, because he had no leverage left. The final order was entered in late September. I kept the house. The HELOC fraud claim moved through the bank's internal process, and they eventually wrote off part of the loss and pursued Derek directly. A civil judgment was entered against him for the drawn funds. Renee's fees were paid from Derek's side, enforced through court mechanisms. And the quietest, strangest victory of all was this. One afternoon, I got a notification from the county recorder's portal. Document recorded. My stomach jumped reflexively. Old trauma. Then I clicked. It was the court's order, recorded against the property, confirming the quitclaim. Deed was void, and title remained mine. My name, my address, the truth, stamped. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at it, tears filling my eyes. And this time, the tears didn't taste like fear. They tasted like reclamation. Weeks later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door, not to evict me, not to intimidate me, to serve Derek. He wasn't there, of course. Derek had moved into an apartment across town and then, according to a neighbor, bounced to somewhere else when bills caught up. The deputy asked if I knew where he was. I shook my head. He handed me a card. "If he contacts you, call us," he said. I thanked him and closed the door. Then I leaned against it, exhaling. Because the last time the sheriff was part of my story, I thought it meant I was losing my home. But now, it meant Derek was losing his lies. A month after that, I ran into Elaine, the notary, in a grocery store parking lot. She looked like she wanted to disappear. "Maya," she whispered, eyes wide. "I'm sorry." I believed she was sorry. I also knew that sorry didn't undo anything. "I hope you learned," I said quietly. Elaine nodded, tears spilling. "I did," she whispered. "I lost my commission. I'm in trouble. He scared me." I held her gaze. "He scared me too," I said. "But I didn't help him." Elaine flinched. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was true. And because truth, spoken calmly, is sometimes the sharpest boundary you can set. The strangest part was how normal life became again. Not instantly, not perfectly, but steadily. I repainted the guest room Derek had used as his office, the room where he'd plotted and printed and lied. I painted it a soft, warm white and turned it into a space that belonged to me. Bookshelves, a desk, a lamp that made the corner feel safe. I ripped out the drawer in the kitchen where he used to stash mail before I saw it and replaced it with an open basket that sat in plain sight. I replaced my old mug with a new one. Small things. But small things are how you rebuild trust in your own space. One night in December, I sat outside under the porch light, wrapped in a blanket, watching my lemon tree sway in a gentle wind. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street, someone's holiday lights blinked, and I thought about Derek's favorite phrase, community property. He'd used it like a weapon, like a shortcut, like the law existed to reward him for marrying me. But what Derek never understood, what men like Derek rarely do, is that the law isn't a fairy tale where the most confident liar wins. The law is paperwork. It's definitions. It's tracing. It's evidence. It's a judge looking you in the eyes and asking, "Did you sign this?" It's a notary journal with the wrong ID number. It's a forensic accountant following the money like a bloodhound. It's a prenuptial agreement that a woman signs when she's still young enough to believe she won't need it, but wise enough to know she might. Derek thought the house was community property, so he treated my life like shared inventory. He thought marriage gave him ownership. He thought the deed was just a piece of paper. He thought fear would make me settle. He thought exhaustion would make me surrender. And for a moment, in those first weeks, I almost did. Because I was tired. Because I didn't want to fight. Because I wanted peace more than I wanted vengeance. But then I learned something that changed everything. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of boundaries. It's the moment you stop negotiating with someone who doesn't respect you. It's the moment you choose the hard truth over the easy lie. It's the moment you read the sentence he didn't read, and you decide to use it. I didn't win because I screamed louder than Derek. I won because I stopped believing his version of the rules. I learned mine. I proved mine. And when the dust finally settled, the house was still standing. Not because Derek spared it, because I did. Because I fought for it. Because I remembered the woman who bought it in the first place, the unmarried woman on the deed, who didn't need anyone's permission to build a life. And when Derek drove past someday, thinking about what he almost got away with, I hoped the same sentence echoed in his head the way it echoed in mine now. Recorded doesn't mean true, and marriage doesn't mean you get to steal.